Welcome to my channel. On my YouTube channel, Indonesian Air Traffic Controller. So, actually, it is my first video talking about overview of Annex 1 up to 19. So, check it out.
Wake up early, gonna rise in the sun. Step 2, get some good, some food in you. Step 3, you grow hard about what you wanna be. Step 4, everybody just do your thing.
Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up, today's gonna be a good day.
I have proposed in this video that it's not my intention to teach you about this annex. I just want to share this knowledge. And then the last one is I suppose that this knowledge is essential for all air traffic controller around the world as aeronautical telecommunication officer, pilot, so on and so forth. So let's have a look about Annex number 1. Annex 1 talking about personal licensing. Number 2, Annex 2, rules of the air. Number 3, Annex 3, meteorological services for international air navigation. Number 4, Annex 4, aeronautical charts. Number 5, Annex 5, unit of measurements to be used in air and ground operation. Number 6, Annex 6, operational of charts. Number 7, Annex 7, aircraft, nationality and registration marks. Number 8, Annex 8, airworthiness of aircraft. Number 9, Annex 9, talking about facilitation. Number 10, Annex 10, aeronautical telecommunications. And Annex 11, talking about air traffic services. Number 12, Annex 12, search and rescue. Annex 13, talking about aircraft accident and incident investigations. Annex 14, talking about aerodrome. Annex 15, aeronautical information service. Number 16, Annex 16, talking about environmental protection. Annex 17, talking about security. Annex 18, talking about the safe transport of dangerous goods by air. And number 19, or the last one, is safety management. Let's check it out about historical background and applicability of Annex 1, talking about personal licensing. Historical background of Annex 1, standards and recommended practices for personal licensing were first adopted by the Council on 14 April 1948 pursuant to the provisions of Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, or Chicago 1944, and designated as Annex 1 to the Convention. They became effective on 15 September 1948. And applicability of this annex, I decided to three separate sections. There are Annex 1 contains standard and recommended practices adopted by the International Civil Aviation Organization as minimum standards for personal licensing. And number 2, the annex is applicable to all applicants for and on renewal to all holders of the license and ratings specified herein. And the last one is the Council has decided that, in principle, amendments affecting existing licensing specifications are applicable to all applicants for and holders of license, but in considering their application to existing holders of license, the assessment, if necessary, by re-examination of the knowledge, experience, and proficiency of individuals licensed holders is left to the discretion of contracting states. On 15 November 1972, when adopting Amendment 14 to Annex 2 relating to authority over aircraft operating over the high seas, the Council emphasized that the amendment was intended solely to improve of flight and to ensure adequate provision of air traffic services over the high seas. The amendment in no way affects the legal jurisdiction of states of registry over their aircraft or the responsibility of contracting states under Article 12 of the Convention for enforcing the rules of the air. So let's talking about historical background and applicability of this annex, which means Annex 2 Rules of the Air. In October 1945, the Rules of the Air and Air Traffic Control Division at its first session made recommendations for standards, practices, and procedures for the rules of the air. These were reviewed by the then Air Navigation Committee and approved by the Council on 25 February 1946. The rules of the Air and Air Traffic Control Division at its second session in December 1946 up to January 1947 reviewed document 2010 and proposed standards and recommended practices for the rules of the air. These were adopted by the Council as standards and recommended practices relating to rules of the air on 15 April 1948, pursuant to Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation and designated as Annex 2 to the Convention with the titles International Standards and Recommended Practices Rules of the Air. They became effective on 15 September 1948. On 27 November 1951, the Council adopted a complete new text of the Annex, which no longer contained recommended practices, the standards, and of the amended Annex 2 or Amendment 1 became effective on 1 April 1952 and applicable on 1 September 1952. And applicability of this annex, the standards in this document together with the standards and recommended practices of Annex 11 govern the application of the procedures for air navigation services or air traffic management or document 4444 and the regional supplementary procedures rules of the air and air traffic service contained in document 7030, in which latter document will be found subsidiary procedures of regional applications. Like over the high seas, it should be noted that the Council resolved in adopting Annex 2 in April 1948 and Amendment 1 to the said Annex in November 1951. That the Annex constitutes rules relating to the flight and maneuver of aircraft within the meaning of Article 12 of the Convention over the high seas. Thereover, these rules apply without exception. On 15 November 1972, when adopting Amendment 14 to Annex 2 relating to authority over aircraft operating over the high seas, the Council emphasized that the amendment was intended solely to improve of flight and to ensure adequate provision of air traffic services over the high seas. The amendment in no way affects the legal jurisdiction of states of registry over their aircraft or the responsibility of contracting states under Article 12 of the Convention for enforcing the rules of the air. So let's talking about historical background and applicability of Annex number 3, which means Meteorological Service for International Air Navigation. Standards and recommended practices relating to meteorology were first adopted by the Council on 16 April 1948 pursuant to the provision of Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation and designated as Annex 3 to the Convention with the title Standards and Recommended Practices Meteorological Codes. The standards and recommended practices were based on recommendation of the special sessions of the Meteorology Division held in September 1947. And applicability of this annex, the standards and recommended practices in this document govern the application of the regional supplementary procedures or document 7030, in which document will be found statement of regional choices where such options are permitted by this annex. So annex number 4, the historical background. The standards and recommended practices for aeronautical charts were first adopted by the Council on 16 April 1948, pursuant to the provisions of Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation and were designated as Annex 4 to the Convention. They became applicable on 1 March 1949. Applicability of Annex 4, which means aeronautical charts, is all charts coming within the scope of this annex and bearing the aeronautical information date of 19 November 2009 or later shall conform to the standards relevant to the particular charts. Now let's talking about Annex 5 units of measurements to be used in air and ground operations. Historical background of Annex 5 is international standards and recommended practices for dimensional units to be used in air-ground communications were first adopted by the Council on 16 April 1948 pursuant to Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation and were designated as Annex 5 to the Convention. They became effective on 15 September 1948 and became applicable on the 1st January 1949. Applicability of this annex is the standards and recommended practices contained in this annex shall be applicable to all aspects of international civil aviation, air and ground operations. Annex 6 Operation of Aircraft. In this annex consists of 3 separate sections. There are Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. Part 1 is International Commercial Air Transport, Aeroplanes 11th edition in July 2018. Part 2, International General Aviation, Aeroplanes 10th edition, July 2018. And the last one is Part 3, International Operations Helicopters 10th edition, July 2018. Historical background of this annex is standard and recommended practices for operation of aircraft. International commercial transport were first adopted by the Council on 10 December 1948 pursuant to the provisions of the Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation and designated as Annex 6 to the Convention. They became effective on 15 July 1949. The standards and recommended practices were based on recommendation of the Operation Division at its first session in April 1946, which were further developed at the second session of the division in February 1947. Standard recommended practices for operation of aircraft international general aviation were first adopted at the Council on 2 December 1968 pursuant to the provisions of Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation and designated as Annex 6 Part 2 to the Convention. They became effective on 2 April 1969 and applicable on 18 September 1969. And historical background of Annex 6 Part 3 is standard and recommended practices for operation of aircraft were first adopted by the Council pursuant to the provisions of Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation on 10 December 1948 for international air transport and on 2 December 1968 for international general aviation. The documents containing these standards and recommended practices are now designated as Annex 6 Part 1 and Part 2 respectively to the Convention. In general, Part 1 and Part 2 addressed aeroplane operation. Neither part is specifically applicable to helicopter operation. Now, Annex 7 Aircraft Nationality and Registration Marks. Historical background of this annex is Annex 7 contains standards adopted by the International Civil Aviation Organization as the minimum standards for the display of marks to indicate appropriate nationality and registration, which have been determined to comply with Article 20 of the Convention. Standards for aircraft nationality and registration marks were first adopted by the Council on 8 February 1949, pursuant to the provisions of Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation and designated as Annex 7 to the Convention. They became effective on 1st July 1949. The standards were based on recommendations of the first and second sessions of the Airworthiness Division, held respectively in March 1946 and February 1947. In general, of Annex 7, which means aircraft nationality and registration marks, the nationality or common mark and registration mark shall be painted on the aircraft or shall be affixed by any other means ensuring a similar degree or of permanence. The marks shall be kept clean and visible at all times. Annex 8 Airworthiness of Aircraft. Historical background of Annex 8 is standards and recommended practices for the airworthiness of aircraft were adopted by the Council on the 1st March 1949, pursuant to the provisions of Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation and designated as Annex 8 to the Convention. So, applicability of this annex, the applicability of the standards is indicated in 1.1, 1.2, 3.1, 4.1, and 6.1 of Part 2, in 1.1 of Parts 3A, 3B, 4A, 4B, 5A, 5B, 6, and 7. The dates were established so as to take account of the provisions of Article 41 of the Convention. However, the Council has recommended that as far as practicable, earlier the dates applied. Related standards of Annex 6 Part 1, Chapter 5 of Annex 6 Part 1, dealing with airplane performance operating limitations, contains standards that are complementary to the airworthiness standards and airworthiness standards of Annex 8, but save board objectives. The standards of Annex 6, Part 1, Chapter 5 are supplemented by guidance material in the form of green page attachments which indicate by examples the level of performance intended by the standards. The Council has argued contracting states not to impose on visiting airplanes operational requirements other than those established by the states of registry, provided those requirements are not lower than Standards of Annex 6, Part 5, as amended by Amendment 2 and 2.2 of Parts 3A, 3B, 4B, 5A, and 5B of Annex 8. Now let's talk about Annex 9, which means facilitation. The historical background of this annex is standards and recommended practices on facilitation were first adopted by the Council on 25 March 1949, pursuant to the provisions of Article 37 to the Convention on International Civil Aviation, and designated as Annex 9 to the Convention with the title Standards and Recommended Practices Facilitation. They became effective on the 1st September 1949. The standards and recommended practices were based on recommendation of the first and second sessions of the facilitation divisions held at Montreal in February 1946 and at Geneva in June 1948. They were expanded and amended comprehensively as a result of subsequent sessions of the division. Example, the third sessions held at Buenos Aires in December 1951, the fourth session held at Manila in October 1955, the fifth session held at Rome, Italy in 1959, six sessions held at Mexico City in March up to April 16 1963. The seventh session held at Montreal in April up to May 1979. The eighth session held at Dubrovnik in March 1973. The ninth session held at Montreal in April up to May 1979. The 10th session held at Montreal in September 1988. The 11th session held at Montreal in 1995, and the third meeting of the facilitation panel held in Montreal in February 2001 as a result of the divisions and fall panel's recommendations for amendment of Annex 9 and Council's action thereon. The second edition of Annex 9 became effective on 1 March 1946, the sixth edition on the 1st April 1969, the seventh edition on 15 April 1974, the eighth edition on 15 July 1980, the 10th edition on 15 November 1990, the 10th edition on 30 April 1997, the 11th edition on 15 July 2002, the 12th edition on 12 July, I say again, 11 July 2005, the 13th edition on 18 July 2011, and the 14th edition on 15 October 2015. The applicability of Annex 9, which means facilitation, is the standards and recommended practices in this document apply to all categories of aircraft operation except where a particular provision specifically refers to one type of operation without mentioning other types of operations. The standards and recommended practices on facilitation inevitably take two forms. First, a negative form example. For example, that states shall not impose more than certain maximum requirements in the way of paperwork, restrictions of freedom of movement, so on and so forth. And second part, a positive form. For example, the states shall provide certain minimum facilities for passengers' convenience for traffic which merely passing through, etc. Whenever a question arises under a negative provision, it is assumed that states will, whenever possible, relax their requirements below the maximum set forth in the standards and recommended practices. Whenever there is a positive provision, it is assumed that states will, whenever possible, furnish more than the minimum set forth in the standard and recommended practice. Let's talk about Annex 10, which means aeronautical telecommunication. In this annex, divided to 5 volumes. There are volume 1 talking about radio navigation aids, volume 2 communication procedures including those with pen status, volume 3 communication system, and in this volume divided to 2 separate sections. Part 1, the digital data, part 1 about digital data communication systems, and part 2 about voice communication systems. And next, volume 4 talking about surveillance and collision avoidance systems, and the last volume 5, talking about aeronautical radio frequency spectrum utilizations. Historical background of this annex is standards and recommended practices for aeronautical telecommunications were first adopted by the Council on 30 May 1949 pursuant to the provisions of Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation, and designated as Annex 10 to the Convention. They became effective on the 1st March 1950. The standards and recommended practices were based on the recommendations of the Communications Division and its third decision in January 1949 up to and including the 7th edition. Annex 10 was published in one volume containing 4 parts together with associated attachments. Part 1 Equipments and Systems, Part 2 Radio Frequencies, and Part 3 Procedures, Part 4 Codes and Abbreviations. By Amendment 42, Part 4 was deleted from the Annex. The codes and abbreviations contained in that part were transferred to a new document 8400, as a result of the adoption of Amendment 44 on 31 May 1965. The 7th edition of Annex 10 was replaced by 2 volumes. Volume 1, or first edition, containing Part 1 Equipment and Systems and Part 2 Radio Frequencies, and Volume 2 first edition, containing Communication Procedures. As a result of the adoption of Amendment 70 on 2 March 1995, Annex 10 was restructured to include 5 volumes. There are Volume 1 Radio Navigation Aids, Volume 2 Communication Procedures, Volume 3 Communication Systems, Volume 4 Surveillance Radar and Collisions Avoidance Systems, Volume 5 about aeronautical radio frequency spectrum utilization. By Amendment 70, Volumes 3 and 4 were published in 1995, and Volume 5 was published in 1996 with Amendment 71. So let's talk about Annex 11. Air Traffic Services, Air Traffic Control Service, Flight Information Service, and Alerting Service. Historical background of Annex 11 is in October 1945, the rules of the Air and Air Traffic Control Division at its first session made recommendations for standard practice and procedures for air traffic control. They were reviewed by the then Air Navigation Committee and approved by the Council on 25 February 1946. They were published as recommendations for standards, practices, and procedures air traffic control in the second part of document 2010, published in February 1946. The rules of the Air and Air Traffic Control Division at its second session in December 1946 up to January 1947 reviewed document 2010 and proposed standards and recommended practices for air traffic control. It didn't appear possible, however, to finalize those standards prior to basic principles being established by the RAC Division for the organization of the relevant services. These were established by the RAC Division at its third session in April up to May 1948, and a draft annex was thereafter submitted to states. This was adopted by the Council on 18 May 1950, pursuant to Article 37 of the Convention on International Civil Aviation as and designated as Annex 11 to the Convention with the title International Standards and Recommended Practices Air Traffic Services. It became effective on 1 October 1950. The new title, Air Traffic Services, was preferred to the title Air Traffic Control in order to take it clear that Air Traffic Control Service was part of the services covered by Annex 11 together with Flight Information Service and Alerting Service. Applicability of this annex is standards and recommended practices in this document together with the standards in Annex 2 govern the application of the procedures for air navigation services, air traffic management, or document 4444, and the regional supplementary procedures, rules of the air and air traffic services contained in document 7030, in which latter document will be found subsidiary procedures of regional application. Annex 11 pertains to the establishment of airspace units and services necessary to promote a safe, orderly, and expeditious flow of air traffic. A clear distinction is made between air traffic control service, flight information service, and alerting service. Its purpose, together with Annex 2, is to ensure with flying on international air routes is carried to under uniform conditions designed to improve the safety and efficiency of air operation. The standards and recommended practices in Annex 11 apply in those parts of the airspace under the jurisdiction of a contracting state wherein air traffic services are provided, and also wherever a contracting state accepts the responsibility of providing air traffic service over the high seas or in airspace of undetermined sovereignty. A contracting state accepting such responsibility may apply the standards and recommended practices in a manner consistent with that adopted for airspace under its jurisdictions. So let's talk about Annex 12, Search and Rescue. Historical background of Annex 12. In December 1946, the Search and Rescue Division at its second session made recommendation for standards and recommended practice for search and rescue. These were developed by the Secretariat and the then existing Air Navigation Committee and were due to submit to the Council. The proposals were not accepted by the Council in the form in which they were presented, and on 20 April 1948 were referred back to the Air Navigation Committee for further consideration. A further draft annex was then developed in the light of experience gained at regional air navigation meetings, and eventually was approved in principle by the Air Navigation Commission and circulated to states for comment. Further development was made by the Aeronavigation Commission as a result of states' comments, and the resulting proposal were adopted by the Council on 25 May 1950 and designated as Annex 12 to the Convention on International Civil Aviation. The Annex became effective on the 1st of December 1950 and came into force on the 1st of March 1951. Applicability of this Annex is the standards and recommended practices in this document govern the application of the regional supplementary procedures. Search and rescue contained in document 7030, in which document will be found subsidiary procedures of regional application. Annex 12 is applicable to the establishment, maintenance, and operation of search and rescue services in the territories of contracting states and over the high seas, and to the coordination of such service between states.
Have this dangerous feeling